right, well, I would.
Interesting, I'm listed as Sue. Yeah,
Well, whatever it was, it fixed itself, Sue.
yeah, it's fine. My name is Sue, so I'm all set.
Oh, hello, Sue.
Hi.
You're a boy.
So,
Wasn't there a boy named Sue?
according to Johnny Cash, there is, yes.
Yeah.
So I see you're successful. I was just trying to log in and start the meeting myself, but I had already set myself up to join the meeting, so we're good?
We're good. Is that better?
Oh, well, how wonderful.
Steve got a haircut.
Actually, my grandfather would say I got them all cut.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well,
All right,
carry on.
thank you.
We'll just call you the Great for short. I'm very curious to see how many people actually come to a meeting in late July in a heat wave.
Well, it's probably cooler in their house than it is going outside.
Yeah, that's a fact. We got a little air conditioner cranking away over there.
Steve, sorry for not attaching that. Once I get that document done this afternoon, I said, oh, that's good. That's beautiful. I just,
I know the feeling. You feel like I finally did it. I'm
yeah, that's
done.
right. I got this done. Now that's it.
Yep. Oh, yes, there it is. Great. Thank you.
It made it.
Surely did.
And looking at it, I think it might be beyond our charge.
Well, you know, I believe in a healthy amount of overlap, and you are the initiator of it. I'm interested in exploring the question of whether the select board might be relieved if there was in fact a separate sewer and water commission group that could do what it does in other towns. I thought that it was only appropriate for really big cities, but it turns out no, there are plenty of small towns that have elected water and sewer commissioners, and they work with the.
Manchester used to.
Mhm.
And then when they went to a DPW elected board, the elected board for the DPW took the place of the park commissioners, the water and sewer commissioners, and doing work with the DPW. And then when that elected DPW board was eliminated, then the Board of Selectmen got the water and sewer commissioners back on their plate.
Yep.
And like cemetery commissioners and all those other things that we have to sign the Dead Sea Scrolls every 2 or 3 weeks when someone buys a plot.
I see. And nobody took over the viewer of fences or the measure of bark.
Measure of wooden bar, field drivers.
Yes, exactly. Those have been retired, right?
Well, I don't know. Alan was always trying to get rid of those. And then when he put it up in front of the town meeting a couple of times, whether he should eliminate them, he got voted down as one of his opening questions. But
All right. Well, it is 7 o'clock and we have a quorum. So I'll call to order the meeting of Manchester's Water Resource Protection Task Force on July 20. For the record, we're holding this virtually on Zoom in accordance with decision by Lieutenant Governor Polito on Monday to extend the provision for hybrid and remote meeting through next March. So we are legal. We are taking notes and recording. Yes, we are recording. And you know the rest of this drill, I'm sure. Members of the public are invited, and we will provide plenty of opportunity for public input as we go along. Any other upfront announcements from anyone? Sue in particular?
I have nothing.
All right, I'll just say I hope you join me in welcoming back Helen Bethel, whose
Yay.
shining face just appeared somewhere on your screen. Very glad to have you back from
Delighted to be back.
a little sick leave, and none the worse for wear.
Well, we'll see. So far, so good.
So we just an anecdote about Helen, because I love telling stories about Helen. We had this visit arranged by the folks who are the DPW and others who are restoring the pedestal that used to hold the original water tank at the top of Powder House. The pedestal's still there. The water tank is long gone. And for years, it was a communications setup for fire and maybe police. But technology has advanced beyond the need, I guess, for that thing. And eventually DPW tore it down and a group of citizens got together. Anyway, long story short, we hiked up the steepest possible trail, which comes right off
Back of Friend Street.
yes, exactly. And Helen and John traipsed right up that trail. I wouldn't say that they were jogging, but none of us were actually. You're a model. Great. Now we definitely have a good attendance. Thank you all for coming. As Tom said, it's probably nicer to be indoors right now than out if you've got a fan or an air conditioner. We're joined, as often is the case, by our consultant, Scott Horsley.
Place that painted us in this corner that was hard to get out of. But
So let's go through a few updates and finish those with some updates from several of the working teams. Sue, you can help me report. Oh no, you missed this. On July 5th, I soloed attempting to update the select board. And I came away with a new understanding of how informed the select board would like to be, particularly when we entertain requests from other boards or commissions, such as we did for the Board of Health on these proposed new regulations. I wouldn't say it was exactly a trip to the woodshed, but it was a chastening event. Is that fair, John Round? And with that in mind,
Yes,
we're going
yes,
to.
I would think so, yes.
Okay, we're going to try to be more more attentive to keeping select board up to date on what we're doing and try to stay in our lane as far as the select board is concerned. Although I have to say, on behalf of the task force, I don't have any regrets about the effort and the result of that work on the regulations. The select board has asked, in fact, as of tonight, they asked for an update at the August 1st meeting. And I'll be asking a couple of you if you can join me for that. I fully understand if people are off on boats or planes or automobiles, but I need a couple of wing men or wing women for that. And I'll also report that the select board on Monday, this Monday, took up their annual question of water and sewer rates. And they went through what I think is their annual process of looking at the requests from DPW, the recommendations, the budget, and voting a small percentage increase in all rate blocks. So they didn't do anything unusual, but they did have discussion which reflected a recognition of the possibility of putting some incentives for conservation and some other things into rate blocks and rate structure in the future. And I took that as at least indirect compliment to the work we've been doing, and in fact to the publicity we got in the cricket last week. Next subject is PFAS, PFAS, and the compost site. And I'm wondering who's best equipped to give us a quick synopsis of that. Would that be Nate, or
Yeah, I can go for it.
would you do it? Thank you.
Yeah. So if anyone read Greg's letter in the cricket last week, I believe, I think it really summed it up well. So a composting facility out in Central Mass tested very, very high for PFAS. I believe it was like 2,000 times the limit. It was incredibly high. Some important notes about that composting facility. It is significantly larger than the proposed composting facility that Black Earth is going to be constructing on the current transfer landfill station for site. Black Earth would be producing about 2% of the annual volume that this composting site out in Western Central Mass was doing. The other big or significant and probably most important aspect is that that composting facility was accepting paper production byproducts and also importantly wastewater sludge, which has been found to be high in PFAS, and it's an issue not just in Central Mass. There's been many farms up in Maine that use these products as fertilizer that now they can't use their farm to farm. It's a very significant issue. So those are the two, I think, big points and big differences between that composting facility and Black Earth. Black Earth does currently test for PFAS. You can find the results of their most recent testing on their website for their compost. They only accept food scraps, and I think everyone's pretty aware of what they're accepting. They don't accept grass clippings for the specific reason of the additional fertilizers. Another big point is that the entire composting process is going to take place in an enclosed building. Any of the runoff from the compost is going to be collected in a leachate system. So basically there's drains in the floors that are going to go to a collection tank that they will reuse to hydrate the compost, keep it moist so it's in that optimal zone. And any byproduct or anything that they have left over, they'll be shipping off site. So once the once the compost is broken down, it'll go to the top of the landfill, and it'll be essentially cured in larger piles atop the landfill. There shouldn't be any significant runoff. Any rainstorms, the compost is going to mostly absorb that. If there is a very significant rainfall, that's going to be absorbed into the slopes of the transfer station. I think, as we've discussed before, we've already been testing for PFAS around the landfill. So we have monitoring wells to the northeast. Predominantly is where we're showing the existing PFAS. I think our highest results, I believe, like 217 PPT. So we've been monitoring that, and there does not appear to be any PFAS going towards Gravelly Pond. Some of the wells in that direction are showing low or no detects in the PFAS. So I think it's something we need to be cognizant of. We need to continue to monitor it, which we are. We sample the landfill twice a year for all contaminants as required by DEP. Those sampling events are submitted to DEP. Currently, DEP doesn't really have much guidance on the solid waste side for PFAS. It's kind of one of these unknowns that they have yet to tackle. So we're just kind of waiting for their guidance and how and if we need to do anything with it. Yeah, any questions?
Good summary. Gordon, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, thanks. I did have a few questions. That's great. I think we're all fortunate that Black Earth is taking such care in what they accept and everything. And I think that they've responded to a number of questions, and that's been really good. I just want to ask if anybody on the call knows, do we have any regulations in town that would prevent a company from accepting municipal sludge or anything like that that might be high in PFAS? I don't believe we do at the moment, but is that something that we should be thinking about? Because we're fortunate to have good management there now, but it may not always be the case, I guess is the question. Should we try to prevent anything like that from the future?
I think that could be a good regulation, to add in the future. It's, most municipalities are sending their waste sludge to landfills at this point. That's what we do. We send it out to Central Mass. So and we're definitely one of the smaller wastewater, in the area. So it's not something we see prevalent in this area, certainly.
Yeah. Okay.
I was just reflecting on what the Conservation Commission put in for conditions. on the
Yeah,
use
that
of
was my other
site.
question. Yeah, do they get, they have to have a permit, right, for Black Earth and,
Yeah,
and
they
is
have,
that,
they have an order of conditions from the Concom. I don't know whether they needed any special permit. Ron, do you remember any proceeding about Black Earth, the planning board?
Nope, nothing came before the board on that.
I think it was Conservation Commission only because their site is surrounded by wetlands. And they're pretty conscientious. I second what Nate said. And Tom Kehoe and perhaps others of you will appreciate this is exactly what we expect from an Eagle Scout, which is what Andrew Brousseau, the guy who founded and runs Black Earth is. Any other questions about that, John?
Yes, yeah. I mean, that last comment you made, Nate, kind of perked my thinking here. So we obviously have sludge from our septic system, our sewer system, and we send that out somewhere in Western Mass.
Yep.
You said, has Black Earth ever asked about that at all, or?
No. We've had conversations with Andrew where he specifically says that they don't want that type of material. It's a different breakdown. It's a different, it's a different process for that type of material.
Okay, well, as was mentioned earlier, maybe it's good to codify the fact that stuff shouldn't be here.
Yeah, I would anticipate that DEP is going to be writing that into their composting regs if it's not already there, to be honest. They're seeing so much of it that they just can't, especially for the small scale producers like Andrew, if that's not already, I would think it's coming.
Okay. I think it's something we should just kind of keep an eye on. Yeah.
Agreed. I think we should do it ourselves, but I would anticipate DEP is going to be enacting something as well.
Yep.
Put it in the parking lot for future recommendations. Thanks, John. Jeff Koshan.
Yeah.
Is it, has it been confirmed absolutely that the problem out west was due to that sludge and the paper? I read a lot of articles on it. I didn't see confirmation of that or anyone saying that's definitely it. But is that like 99% likely?
Yes. So Nantucket has done testing. They have compost that was both treated with sludge and also not. And their compost that was not treated with sludge did not come back with PFAS. The sludge that did, or the compost that was treated with sludge came back with PFAS. So it is definitely, can be accounted for that.
All right, so it's actually the sludge, it's not the paper products.
I don't know. I can't speak to the paper because that I think that seems to be a one-off. It sounds like there might have been, I read probably the same articles that you did, but it's kind of my knowledge from the sludge is kind of ancillary, and that's where it's, you're kind of the farms up in Maine that treated with it, there's no other possibility of, it's not naturally occurring PFAS in the, fields of Maine. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Next updates are about Hamilton, the town of Hamilton, and the interaction and threats to our collective watershed. I can report that the Hamilton Planning Board is scheduled its final public hearing on the development that's proposed for the end of Tobacco Road. It's 50 senior luxury units, freestanding. So it's not an apartment building, but in many respects, the site is a miniature version of what we see at Shingle Hill. It's granite that needs to be blasted and removed. It's surrounded by wetlands, and it has connections, obvious hydrological connections to ponds and aquifers that are used for drinking, including our own. And it's impossible to tell how the planning board will sort out. The Concom in Hamilton has permitted this project with very extensive conditions. And I was kind of pleased to see what the planning board has gone through. They've spent, I think, better than a year weighing this, and in the process, they've gotten pretty well educated on the basics of hydrology and aquifers and storm runoff and other things which I guess aren't typically part of planning board debate and decision. But who knows where that'll come out. Now, the other thing is that the DEP is evaluating an appeal concerning a little stretch of Tobacco Road that's closest to Gravelly Pond. And when they come out for a site visit, I think that's typically when they decide whether or not the question is worthy of them considering what's called a superseding order of conditions. So that's kind of up in the air, and I don't know what effect it has had on the town of Hamilton's plans to begin the paving. But you may remember that they're under some kind of pressure to use their financing or lose it in the next month or so. Anybody else have any news from the neighbors, Hamilton or Essex or Wenham? Okay. Last update is about the cricket, which has begun covering what we're doing. You may have seen the article last week, which read as though it was an interview of Tom Kehoe and me, although it was simply Erica Brown using the transcript from our last meeting to talk about conservation. And what is it P.T. Barnum said? I don't care what you say about me as long as you spell my name right. They did spell the task force name right. And I think she woke up, her writing woke up some interest. Certainly the select board reflected it on Monday. Concern and questions about how to put conservation into the mix of rates. So we should expect Erica to continue this. She's interested in it. I think her next coverage will probably be about the Board of Health proposed regulations. And then after that, she wants to take up the Tobacco Road paving question, which certainly is a long involved story. And I think, this is good if it helps stir the pot and get people in town thinking about their drinking water. That's a good thing. Anybody else have a reaction? Jeff, you have one.
Erica stopped me on the street and was talking with me, and she was exactly as you described, very interested in everything. And Steve and I have also talked about, and I talked with Erica about putting other articles in the Cricket, like some of you have seen Jim Benke's articles. I just started talking with him about. We have a lot of positive stories to tell, basically, is my I think all of our feelings, actually. The people who had the insight or the foresight to do what they've done with Gravelly Pond that whole history there, that whole situation, the Lincoln Street well, it's a good story, and most people don't know it. Almost nobody knows that we own 200+ acres in Hamilton. Honestly, Erica didn't even realize that Lincoln Street well was part of our water supply. So, there's a lot of information that we know that's positive that we can use the Cricket and other sources to get out.
And Jeff, I loved your point earlier when you and I were talking about taking the foresight that people had in town more than 100 years ago to acquire that land and to get the water rights from the legislature, and saying, we should pay that forward. It's our job to have equal or greater foresight about things like climate change and contaminants and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's a good way to make the positive work.
Another little example is we all went on the tours of the water treatment plant and Lincoln Street well. I've lived here for quite a long time, always been interested in that, never done that. I think that's an interesting topic to share with the town, and I think it's all positive as far as obviously understanding where our water comes from, and that's the first step, I think, toward people being responsible with the water.
Bingo. As you may be able to tell, I've drafted Jeff into helping with citizen awareness and PR and outreach, and I have to say he's a natural. I did speak to Erica this week just to make a few minor corrections in what she had published, because it turns out if you focus just on last year, the Essex County Club was not the largest commercial user of drinking water. And I promise a sizable prize to anyone who can guess who it actually was. Although I think they are when you average together 5 to 10 years. And also that there's at least 3 or 4 residential users whose annual usage is higher than any of the commercial users. Most of them are multi-family, things like Sea Rock Estates or the Phileas complex on Desmond. But 1 or 2 of them are single-family residences. But I think she got the point across, even if the specifics were a little off. Any other updates? Then let's hear from group 2 about supply and potential new sources. What are you guys cooking up? A deafening silence.
We have no update.
All right. Sorry to catch you unawares. How about group 4, Gordon and Jessica and company?
I guess I can give just sort of a brief update of what we've been focusing on. Obviously, a lot of PFAS discussions, both with the composting questions that came up after the Boston Globe article, as well as the new regulations from or the new statement from the EPA and things like that. So there's been a lot of topics around PFAS that we've been talking about. I don't know that we've made a whole lot of progress on any particular topics related to that, but we've got the PFAS we're tracking, and we've got the salt issue that we're still thinking about. And in addition to that, we're looking at still the other hazards in town, other things that have been reported to the DEP. So we're sort of trying to work through different closure reports and things like that, and just understand different potential sites for contamination that have changed since the 1989 report. And also, yeah, on the salt topic, we're still trying to figure out, how we best approach that and what options we have for trying to understand that. And on the PFAS topic, one other item that was added, suggested by Steve, was that we try to sort of pull together some informational material for citizens should they be concerned with what the levels are in the well. So we'll be looking into some of that as well. Anything else from the team that you want to chime in on that we've been talking about that I forgot?
We are going to go meet with some representatives from the school Hopefully in August, we're trying to set up a date to talk about what they are thinking for the repair or replacement of the turf field. Also going to talk to them about their salt use, and we're kind of curious if they have information about where fill came from, if they needed fill on the construction of both of the school projects. And then I actually have a question for Tom Kehoe. We're also in contact with the fire chief about the firefighting foam and all of that. And he hasn't been here a long time, so he wasn't totally sure what in the past was done with training with foams and stuff. So I didn't know if Tom Kehoe's still on, if he has any memories of that stuff, but I don't know if he's still here.
Yeah, we used foam, but not that often. Our trucks were not set up for foam. The new pump is set up to be able to have foam with it. Before you had to have these huge foam generating nozzles. I'm sure that, I mean, we did it maybe once a year. I can't say anything about the foam, but yeah, we did train with it. We've used it on I can remember using it on a couple of fires up on 128 when we had cars that had magnesium in them, and that was the best way to put them out, because the water would just evaporate when it hit it because the magnesium was burning so hot. But yeah, foam, the firefighting foam, it isn't like we're a regional training facility where you're having a tremendous amount of departments coming in and training on it, you know, every weekend for 4 or 5 weekends with different departments coming in. It's just done, you know, with our local department and all the years I was on the department.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for reminding me, Jessica, about that. And the fire chief did say they're investigating some safer alternatives for foams and things like that. So I think that's good news. I forgot what I was going to say, but I had one other thing that reminded me of when you said that. If it comes back to me, I'll chime in. Thanks.
It's worth noting, if you didn't see the chat, Nate has reported that he remembers a clause in the contract between the town and Black Earth that stipulates the town must be in agreement with all organic materials accepted by Black Earth at the site. So essentially, the town would be able to veto if they ever have a wild impulse to use some sewage sludge.
Nate's hand is up, and then I remembered what I was going to say, and it was actually a question for kind of Nate and maybe Scott Horsley as well. But go ahead, Nate, if you want to.
You can continue. I was just going to add on.
You know, one of the things that we keep circling around in our discussions in Team 4 is trying to get a little bit better of an understanding of whether the PFAS or the salt issues at the Lincoln Street well are from sort of local to the well, or if they're coming from further up in the water supply. And I guess to that question, to that point, I mean, it sounds like, Nate, you've been sampling other wells around town. Do you have PFAS levels from other sites in town that would sort of help a hydrologist or somebody kind of figure out, is there a gradient? Is there higher levels near the school, or is a level high, you know, away from the school and it's just leaching down to it, or something like that? It might influence some of the recommendations as to whether we focus our efforts at the school or elsewhere, you know.
So I only caught, my video just dropped out, froze. So I caught half of that. So the only wells we're currently testing are just outside of the current landfill. We don't have any other
monitoring wells. He was about to say.
What was that?
Other monitoring wells.
Yep. So one of my thoughts has been to basically start at the landfill where we have it and try to trace it back and, try to delineate where that PFAS is going. That's obviously going to be a fairly significant cost field program to enable that. It's not readily accessible, especially in that area northeast of the landfill. But seeing where, I agree with you, Gordon, it's hard to say whether it's local, whether it's coming from outside sources. So, some form of delineation program, I think would be beneficial.
Good idea. I think this is a question for Scott Horsley, perhaps, but is it possible to test any of the wells now put into Cedar Swamp, including the old Gloucester well, to see what the PFAS level is there?
Yeah, Steve, I was going to ask a similar question for both, really focused on the salt issue, but I think it pertains to the PFAS as well. To answer your specific question, I believe that would be possible. I know that well has been found and mapped and discussed quite a bit. I'm not certain of the access to the well, whether we can get into it or not. Maybe Nate knows more about that, or Ashley may, because I know she was pretty involved in that, but that certainly is a possibility. My question on the salt was going to be, has anybody either done an assessment or approached the state regarding Route 128 as a potential source? It is a large impervious area that's probably pretty heavily salted. I don't know if it's been, they do have a program to identify low salt areas and water supply areas, and arguably this is one of those, but I don't know offhand whether that's something DOT has considered or declared. So I'm just wondering if anybody has any background information on that.
Jessica does, from the stream team.
Yeah, the stream team, I don't have the exact dates in front of me, and I don't know if Francie is on, but we did start an effort to try and work with the state for not only 128, but also 127, since it then goes, by the schools. And we kind of hit a brick wall because they wanted a ton of testing for like a year before and then years after. And we went to the selectmen, and I think there just wasn't the appetite to do it at the time, but it's something we are sort of hoping there might be more of an appetite for this time. And that things might have changed. I don't remember exactly when it was, but I want to say it was at least 10 years ago. So how that whole process works might have changed as well.
Good idea. Wasn't MECT, didn't MECT commission testing in the old Gloucester well and in 2 other monitoring wells they created in Cedar Swamp just in the last couple of months?
Steve, they've been doing water levels and temperature in those wells. In fact, there's a continuous recorder in that well, but not, to my knowledge, no chemical testing.
No sampling. Okay.
Yeah,
might be helpful to the team too as well for possibility of new sources in Cedar Swamp.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I agree with MECT has not done any chemical testing, but the wells in general, I think, we should look into that. And then that leads into another thing, which is finding that third source of water, I think. And that's something that I want on our radar to, if we're looking at these wells, it's got to be, I would think it's got to be a well somewhere. And so as we look at these wells, I think Scott can help us find that third source of water potentially. And just, I totally agree with everything that was said. If you look at it practically, where is stuff coming from into the Lincoln Street well? It's only, I think there's only a few spots. It's the school is the obvious spot. 128 is the obvious spot. Essex County Club could be an obvious spot, but I don't know of anything that they're leaching that would have PFAS. And then the only other really weird one would be our dump, which has the high PFAS and kind of is the beginning of Sawmill Brook, because it flows north from there under 128 into Sawmill, into Heron Pond, that area, and then down into Sawmill Brook. That would take those well testing tests to figure out if that could possibly be the source of PFAS at the Lincoln Street well, our dump at the very beginning of Sawmill Brook.
By dump, you mean our retired landfill?
Retired, yeah.
Yes.
And then,
No, that's
The
not.
source of,
the
that's the source of Sawmill is off Blue Heron Lane and Old Essex
Right.
Street.
No, well, yes, but that runs north. That runs north under 128, which is the
Right.
same way that Maple Swamp runs. And it's
That's
a
possible.
remote possibility.
Yep. Fair enough. I just saw a hand, but I don't see it any longer. Nate, you have another comment? Oh, it's Randy. Randy, unmute and speak up, please.
Yes, so unmute. Yeah, so there probably is some potential sources in the town. But one of the things that people should also be probably prepared for is PFAS they're finding PFAS to be really ubiquitous everywhere. So there's a possibility that you may not find a source. It could just be, background levels, or, it could just not be a discrete source for the PFAS.
Yeah. Well, I think it'll be important for us to come out with a finding that says that's probably the case or probably not the case, in order to have that in front of the select board and to be an answer for citizens. Because natural thing to look for when you feel that you're being poisoned without knowing it is, where's the smoking gun? Who put this
Sure.
poison in the water supply? Okay. Nate, your hand is up. Is that intentional or leftover?
Intentional. I was just going to add, so I was
Thank you.
on a call with DEP's water group today, and pretty much a lot of the public water supplies in Mass, and they just provided a couple kind of interesting bits I was going to share. So they indicated that EPA is going to be issuing an MCL draft potentially late 2020, and they kind of very much caution the lateness of that, December. So it'll be very interesting to see what the EPA institutes as or establishes as an MCL, and then that would go final, they believe, in 2023. They didn't really indicate whether they thought it was going to be higher or lower than Mass's. So if it was lower than Mass's, Mass would have to revise their regulations and lower their MCL to meet whatever EPA establishes if it is below. And just a couple other kind of anecdotal things. Basically, half of the public water supplies in Massachusetts have tested positive for PFAS at at levels above detect. EPA is considering the testing limit right now, and to put this into context with their health advisory, that reliable testing can only be done down to 4 parts per trillion. DEP indicated that they're seeing in Mass that reliable testing is down to about 2 parts per trillion. So just a couple tidbits I picked up today I wanted to share.
Thank you. That's very useful. I wonder, did they mention which of the perfluoroalkyls would be included in the MCL? Will it be the big 6 or not?
They hadn't yet. The 2 biggest ones right now are the PFOA and PFOS. Those, they didn't specify which it was, or if it was like the PFAS 6. So more to come on that.
Great, thank you. Gordon.
Thanks, Nate. That's super helpful. Can you clarify your last statement there about the discussion around the minimum or the ability to detect level? Because we had some conversations about that in our sub team as well, and I just didn't quite catch what you said.
Yeah, basically they said that EPA is, I guess, reliable testing, or where test results are reliable down to 4 parts per trillion.
Okay.
I don't know. They didn't really give context to that. I assume it's kind of based on a nationwide testing ability. Whereas Mass, where I would assume we probably have, much above average labs, compared to the nation, that we can test in the state reliably down to 2 parts per trillion.
Okay, that's interesting. So just for context for the rest of the group, the reports that you guys sent us, which were super helpful from the testing labs, they use a method that is an EPA method for testing. And you're right, the lower limit of quantification for those tests is set at 2 parts per trillion, but that's with an uncertainty level of plus or minus 50% at that level. And so that gives you a sense that it's maybe not so reliable, but you go lower than 2, it's going to be worse than that, but you go above 2 and your ability starts to get better. And so at 4, you're probably able to measure more accurately. And so EPA may be taking that into account. That's kind of what it sounds like you're saying. And one of the things we noted was that we're measuring 6 different components in our water supply, some of which are right around that threshold of 2. And so if in one sampling or in one lab, you fall above 2, it gets counted against your total. And if in another one you fall below 2, it doesn't get counted. And so that can help explain the wide variability you're seeing between labs that are doing the testing. So I think it would be great if EPA recognized that 4 was more realistic as a limit, but I guess we'll wait and see what they say.
Thank you.
See who says statisticians don't have a rich inner life. Jeff.
I just thought of one other thing when somebody mentioned Phil and building the school. Shingle Place Hill and building there, and I'm kind of asking Scott, do PFASs occur in building do they result from building projects like Phil or the construction process? Even like we mentioned firefighting in the future, if there's a fire up there with the stuff that they put on that, be a problem. And then, you know, in your opinion, Scott, is Shingle Place Hill directly connected to the potential PFAS level in the Lincoln Street well, given that it's up there at Heron Pond?
So Jeff, I'm not aware, great question. I'm not aware of any evidence that PFAS has been connected to construction materials or process. Of course, the fact if they're bringing in fill, one would want to ask, where's the fill coming from? And, you know, in that case, there could be, I think, the potential to import something, but I'm not aware of any direct connection. Although whoever said it earlier, I think the more I read about this, everything still stays on the table in terms of potential sources because we're finding it everywhere. So I'm not saying it's not there. I'm just saying I haven't seen a lot of direct evidence. On the second part of your question, I mean, Shingle Hill is obviously hydrologically connected to the Lincoln Street well, ultimately. So the pathway is there. But again, I don't think there's been enough assessment yet to determine risks in terms of the water quality impacts. That's still under review.
Thank you.
There is a study done by a private Green Science Policy Institute that reports PFAS being added to roofing materials, paints, coatings, sealants, caulks, adhesives, fabrics, glass, and other construction materials to provide functions such as weatherproofing, corrosion prevention, and resistance to stains, grease, and water.
Do they know that runs off from those materials over time, or that they're just used in the process?
They simply found them in the finished product. They speculate that it does leach or run off, but what we don't know about PFAS is you know, this is iceberg material. We have just a little visible peak.
That's a huge issue.
Amount, we don't know.
That's a potential huge issue for Shingle Place Hill then, because if you think about just upstream from Lincoln Street, well, it's like I said, the County Club, Route 128, the MAC, that's it. So if it's leaching off those materials 30 years from now,
yeah,
PFAS could look different in the Lincoln Street well.
It'd be nice to know. It's not limited to residential construction. Obviously, if we build a substantial research facility, for instance, you have to use the same materials. Randy, you've had your hand up. Speak up. You'll need to unmute first.
Mute.
There you go. Oops. You're still muted.
Okay.
Yep, now we can hear. You seem to bounce right back into mute. Well, work on that. And there you go. Same problem. While you sort that out, let me follow up on the email I sent out to some of you who have volunteered to step up as leaders of the working groups or working teams. It's time for us to look ahead roughly a year, because we want to complete before the end of next fiscal year, which would be June 30th, 2023. And to do that, we really need a sense from each team of what issues are you trying to fact find about, and where are you headed in terms of making recommendations about those. We're not trying to jump the gun on any recommendations, but for instance, this question of, are there point sources or smoking guns for PFAS and sodium, or is it a more endemic kind of problem? That's something that needs to be nailed down by a particular point if we're going to make any recommendations based on it. So that's what I had in mind. And Sue Croft has already created kind of a master timeline to insert all of this into, so that we can look at how we're going to, as a group, review the facts as they become clearer, and have some sort of formal but not too time-consuming process of considering recommendations in the spring of next year. We also have a request from Greg reminding us that the town sets its budgets starting in November and then votes them in annual town meeting in April. And if there are recommendations that are more urgent and can be, well briefed with science and evidence by November, we should try to put those forward. I was pretty cautious about not committing to any team or any particular area, because I don't want us to make recommendations we can't support very well. But we should keep that in mind as well. Any questions about that process? It will also help us in communicating up to our sponsor, the select board, kind of where we are in our timeline, why this is taking another 12 months, for instance, and when they can expect some stuff to chew on. Part of that process will also be scheduling meetings a little more forward in the calendar than meeting to meeting. And with that in mind, I'm suggesting we stick with the every 3 weeks cycle until at least we find ourselves heating up either in November, if that's the case, or more likely in February and March of next year. Any reactions to a 3-week interval? Silence is acquiescence here. Okay, good.
Steve, this is Scott. I have my hand up. I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, I can. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, so just briefly on your question about budget, I was just thinking we did have a prior discussion about placing some monitoring wells around town for a variety of purposes. One being to better define the capture area to the Lincoln Street well, as you recall. But I'm just thinking tonight when Nate mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nate, that there probably aren't many monitoring wells around to even do survey of maybe early warning systems or trying to track sources. So I'm wondering, is this the type of item that might be appropriate to consider for that November timeframe? And if so, certainly something I can start thinking about. A monitoring well network.
It'd certainly be useful, I think, Scott, to have an order of magnitude budget for that kind of stuff, so we'd know, and also the duration, how many months, how many quarters would be required in order to have any useful set of observations, trends.
Steve, isn't it possible that we could use some of the money that was voted for this year? Because if we wanted to have these approved to go into the November, December budget and get approved at town meeting, then nothing could be spent until July 1st, 2023.
Good
So
point.
that's in other words, we have, we have what, $80,000
Correct.
voted this year for expenses. So if that's something that Scott thought was important, I think it would be important for him to bring that to us as a recommendation, and then we could figure that out. Now, I don't know whether we have to go to the, I almost said Board of Selectmen, Select Board. After being on the Board of Selectmen for 12 years, it's difficult for me to, I noticed in my document I sent you, said BOS like 3 times rather than SB. So sorry, members of the board.
I'm deeply offended.
Yeah, but if that's something that Scott feels is important, and then as a group we feel that that's important, then we should recommend that to the select board, that we be allowed to use so many $1,000s of our allotment to have those monitoring wells in place as for this date to this date or something. Just my opinion.
It's a good idea. What do others think about that, about allocating some fraction of the $80,000 to creating and monitoring some wells?
Yeah, Steve?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Certainly, we would have to get approval from the select board, because right now the assumption is that money is going in other directions. I don't know what any of this stuff costs. Scott, is drilling a couple of monitoring wells, are you close enough to that to say, oh, this costs $10,000 or $20,000, or is this like a 6-figure number? Or I don't.
For a town-wide program, could easily be a 6-figure number. Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be. It can be more targeted. My thought on this is I'd love to talk with maybe Nate about this, some specifics. He's already offered to send me some of the landfill reports, so I suspect we don't need much more there. But yeah, it's probably in the range. I mean, you're talking at least tens of thousands, certainly, to get a network of wells. I mean, I think we put some wells in, we put a couple wells in up around the Shingle Hill area, and I think that was 5 or 10K just for 1 or 2 wells, to give you an idea. There is an economy of scale if you get a driller out there going from one site to the next, but it's definitely worth spending time carefully thinking about this before you send the driller out.
Yeah, your last point was the question I was asking. In other words, we could get started with something like that, but if this is something you got to do it all in one shot to be most efficient, well, we have to think about that as an angle as well. But it's worth exploring. Yes, you should chat with Nate and see what you come up with, and you might come up with 2 or 3 different scenarios, ideal and
good, better,
kind of
best.
slim down, etc. Yes, yeah. I think so. I mean, you don't want to be drilling 50 wells here, I don't think, but
Scott, that would be consistent with where you left off in 1990, right? In terms of getting more specific about the groundwater sources for the aquifer around the well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's a way we could do it really for 2 or 3 purposes. One being to better define, the contributing areas, which was the original idea. But relative to tonight's conversation, I'll see if we can use it to try to determine, for example, where we might find PFAS within the system, or salt. And then thirdly, as a so-called early warning system before it gets to the well or the reservoir, if we know something's coming, maybe there's a chance to do something about it. We might be able to design something where a network of wells accomplishes more than one of those objectives.
Good. Other opinions? Gordon,
Yes.
you're muted.
I think Randy had her hand up first, and I might be raising the same point that Randy has brought up in our sub-team
Fire away,
meeting. but-
Randy. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Muted again.
Oh, she keeps going on mute.
Yeah.
One thing that's been brought up a few times in our discussions, and hopefully this is it, Randy, but you can put it in the chat, maybe in text if I'm not getting it. It's one thing to go around testing for salt, which has no regulations on it. Do we run into any risks if we go around testing for something like PFAS and we find it in high levels in places? What are the implications for the site that you find it? And that's something I don't know, but I think Randy is concerned about that and has brought it up a few times. So we might want to just think about that a little bit too.
Yeah. Scott, is there an obvious safe, unsafe kind of answer to that?
No, it's a really good point, Gordon, and something we'd want to review in the context of a LSP. I'm not a licensed site professional, but as you're suggesting, there are reporting requirements when you find things. So sometimes people don't want to go looking. But so that's a good question, and I can certainly try to get an answer for you before we go too far with that.
Yeah, I think we would want to be very cognizant of any private wells, because that would be the big implication. Is if you find it and you're within, is it 200 or 500 feet of a 500 feet of a private well, then that would cause serious issues for that person.
Yeah, they certainly want to test. Although private drinking wells are unusual here in Manchester, correct? A major one I know of is up at the medical center.
There are a few around town, yeah, but they are pretty minimal, but there are, a few kind of spread around town. Yeah.
Hey, Nate, while we're on that, if I can jump in, do we have a map of where they are? Do you know where they are?
Not off the top. I mean, I kind of yes and no, but we could certainly figure that out. Yeah.
All right. I'll set up a call with you to talk about a few of these things, perhaps next week.
Sounds good.
Randy, I see you're unmuted. Can we take advantage of that and hear
Yes.
you?
Can you hear me now?
Yep,
Hopefully.
we can hear you.
Yeah, so one of the issues also can be that, again, we just said that PFAS has a very low reporting threshold, which would trigger a hazardous waste site if it's found at a certain level. And it wouldn't necessarily have to do with the private wells, but just if it's found on a piece of property and it's above a certain reporting threshold, that particular property would become part of a hazardous waste site, which has a number of implications.
Good to know. A little frightening to think about. And that would apply even if it's 30, 60 feet below the property's surface.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll look forward to that, Scott, and I think we can make that also part of the discussion about making sure that you have the contract for the regular work you're doing here in support of the task force. Any other comments or thoughts about the goal setting and timelines? I don't want to make this too much like a project from McKinsey and Company or BCG, but I've been impressed by what most of the working teams are doing that I've seen, and I think it makes sense to ask you first, where do you want to take this and what do you need to get there? Jeff.
I'm just thinking of Scott's 1990 report and what we're going to create. And I want to make more of a living document this time, a living result. And simple examples are Group 4's database. Gordon mentioned, oh, we could pay for that. It's free right now. Well, I think we should put it in the budget to pay some budget, the select board, whatever's budget, to pay for that and update it quarterly or whatever it is. And then, 3 years from now or 5 years from now, somebody can go back to that and see the current results. That's an example. Or these potentially ongoing monitoring of wells, or the ability to turn those on real quick. Basically make the 2023 version of Scott's awesome 1990 document more of a living document.
Amen. Randy, more to say?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Glad you fixed the tech problem. Good. The next item on the agenda is an update on community engagement and a community survey and outreach, which we're calling marketing our efforts. Happily, Erica Brown has jump-started that process for us, thanks to her curiosity and Jeff's initiative. But we've also talked about alternatives like having a posting somewhere besides the town website that invites people to inquire about what we're doing. For example, we wouldn't want to start a debate about PFAS with a bunch of facts and data. But we could say that we're looking at it and we're aware of what's happening at the national level, at the state level, and right here at home. And if people wanted to join that conversation, we could give them a way to do that. We also talked about ways of encouraging people to, this will probably be in September when attention turns back to school and more serious subjects, hopefully, encouraging them to participate in a survey. We now have a date for the town meeting in November. I think it's 14th.
14th, yeah.
Yeah. So it would be ideal, I guess, to have some feedback, some results from the initial responses to a survey, and use that to sort of encourage more people to respond, or if they don't want to take a survey, just to give us some opinions, or better yet, come to a meeting. Because one of the ways this is going to have a life after we write up the results and recommendations is for people to be engaged and maybe a little worked up about the subject. Any reactions, suggestions about engagement and survey and marketing?
Steve, is the survey still, I mean, I feel like the survey was created and we gave input so long ago, and I feel like we've talked about something like, is that set in stone? Are we revisiting that? I feel like maybe we would even be changing what we're asking based on all the
It's a
work we've
really
been
good
doing.
point. Yeah, I agree. I suspect others would too. We know back then we were unconsciously incompetent. We didn't even know what we didn't know. Now at least we know what we don't know and have some facts, so it might be worth exploring. I don't know whether I should squelch my marketing instincts, but there's a part of me that wants to have kind of a true false section with some kind of prize available to somebody who gets the best set of answers. And actually, I've thought up the perfect prize, which is one of my favorite products that has never really succeeded in hitting the market. And that is dehydrated water. You can get a very small box of this that will serve hundreds of people. Forgive me. That's,
Just add water.
yeah. I did have a client who brought out in their service stations pink air to put in your tires. It worked fairly well. So don't underestimate marketing, even if it seems like a cuckoo idea. All right, we talked a little bit about schedules before, and as I said, Sue Croft is helping me, and we'll try to merge in what she gets from each of the working teams. So it'd be great if you can get her something in the next week. And that part of that process will be trying to get some dates on the calendar for meetings so we can look forward a bit and make sure we're not colliding with a major town event or holiday or other things. But I was going to suggest that our next meeting be in mid-August, unless anyone has a better suggestion, and that would be the 17th, 4 weeks from today. And then we can.
Steve, you had
come
said
back-
you wanted to stick with the 3-week schedule?
Well,
So
I
if
was,
it- if-
I was,
If it's,
I was thinking of summer as
oh, okay,
the slight release, and then the 3-week schedule would put us on September 7th.
whatever, yep.
Labor Day is early this year, so I always think of Labor Day as kind of a starting gun for resuming serious activities, work and school. But I'm entirely open to suggestions if you think we should stick to 3 weeks or even accelerate a bit. All right, let's try for August 17, and 7 p.m. will be our customary time. We have some minutes from our last meeting, which was at the end of June. Any comments or suggestions on those minutes? All right, can I hear a motion to accept them
I'll move there, be accepted as presented.
in a second?
Second,
Moved and seconded, Mr. Kehoe and Mr. Round. All those in favor, find some way to indicate your agreement.
Aye.
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 Excellent. And those opposed? It is unanimous, I declare. Thank you. Now we come to our favorite part of the agenda, which is items not anticipated at the time the agenda was formed. Helen, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but you've had some time to think while we've been scurrying around here, and I'm curious what your reaction to where we are, and also the point you made in an email just a couple of hours ago to me.
You.
Would you like to say anything to the group?
Yeah, I'll raise my hand. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Well, I have been under the impression that we were going to look at the water supply and its viability for the future, as well as the problems that exist today. And is that not correct?
I think you're hearing a resounding yes.
Well, I mean, do we have enough water? Will we have enough water in 20 years? That kind of thing. And in that context, what is happening right now regarding SLV, I think is going to have a major impact, could have a major impact on our water supply. And that's because it's ended up with the town seemingly pursuing putting pipes under Route 128 to the area north of 128 to satisfy both water supply and refuse, sewage disposal. Now you don't, when you do that, if that goes through, it doesn't just affect the property that you're working on right then. It opens up the entire area to other landowners who will find that their land is more valuable than it used to be, and it will promote development. And development not only will take water and burden sewage, but it will introduce additional pollutants. Now, should we be working on that now? And if so, the deadline is next Wednesday. And I don't know that our group really is in a position to come out formally and oppose that aspect of the project, but it's something we really need to think about.
Great point. What are people's thoughts? Gordon?
I would tend to agree with Helen. It has a large potential impact on the area. And I guess one thing that I feel like this group knows about that a lot of the rest of the town does not know about is how well connected that region is to our water supply, and that things that happen there could negatively impact what amounts to 40% of our town water supply. So, you know, if nothing else, I think it could be nice for this group to try to make that point clearly at the next meeting, or maybe send a letter or something to the ZBA just to really state that that connection and how this could impact us in the future.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, Helen, I think it's a great point. And I'm just looking back at our 1990 report here, because I know we did what we call a build out analysis. I'm not sure everybody, I'll just quickly define that. What we do, and I don't remember the details of what we did do. I'm just looking at it right now, but you basically take maps of the town, look at what is built at a point in time, and then you look at what are so-called buildable lots, which is really anything that doesn't have a long-term, let's say, conservation restriction. It can't be a wetland, but everything else is considered buildable. Then what you do is you take the zoning and other land use laws at that time, and you try to calculate what is the potential. And the potential future growth under build out falls into two categories: undeveloped lots, or developable lots, and then what we call underdeveloped lots. An underdeveloped lot is something that does have a house on it now, but maybe it can become an 8-bedroom house instead of a 2-bedroom house. And ideally, that's what a build out will get you. I'm just quickly looking at what we did back in 1990, and it was clearly pretty basic. But that might be a way to get at Helen's question. The old school method was to use population projections, look at your growth in the last 20 years and say the same thing is going to happen in the next 20 years, but that never works. And
Yeah.
when you're planning a long-term, demand analysis for a limited resource, the real question is not what's going to happen in 20 years, but what could happen down the line. I think if I'm anticipating your question correctly, Helen, that would be the way that I would recommend going at that. And I don't know if the town has done a build out analysis since 1990 or not, but that might be one way to get at that question.
Well, we're talking about commercial development because the area is zoned for that. And there are a lot of small lots on Jiggle Hill, which could be combined to create who knows what. There's, I don't know the acreage there. And then on the other side of Southern Avenue, there's property on the other side that was the quarry lot. It's now been sold. When the former owner bought it in 2015, it was worth $1,120,000, say, and it's now been sold for $10 million. Now, town meeting supports building on the quarry site, but that lot includes a lot more than the quarry site. It includes the athletic club, which may be a viable commercial endeavor that will continue. And then you'll have this new environmentally sensitive firm in there. And then there's, I take it to be about 15 acres of woodland forest untouched at the moment. Now that could be taken down and something else put in there. So we have to be mindful of those things. Otherwise, the Board of Health regulations look good to me, but they're all designed for septic systems. There will be no more septic systems north of 128.
Yeah. Well,
Big
the new
difference.
regulations also include storm water runoff.
Oh, yes, I don't mean it was limited to that, but it's basically based on septic systems,
That's their bailiwick.
which is already out of date. Well, of course, SLV's project has not gotten final approval, but it looks to me that's the way it's headed.
Jeff?
Ellen's immediate comment refers to next Wednesday's ZBA meeting. I think it's next Wednesday's ZBA meeting, and whether or not we as a task force should comment there. I have a fair amount of experience commenting at those meetings. Some went well, some didn't go so well. The question is, I think there's a question to us. Are we going to officially comment at that meeting? And the purpose of that, my understanding, the purpose of that, put these things on record so that when the Housing Authority Committee appeal process is heard, there's a little bit more data to refer to. That's my understanding of why we would do that.
Yep, and I would note the planning board has, I believe recently or is about to send a letter with recommendations to the ZBA. The Concom has sent several over the proceedings. And I'm sure there have been some other town boards weighing in.
Is this
Well,
something,
we're-
excuse me, is this something that the Concom would consider writing an additional letter on?
We could, but we might be repeating ourselves. Ellen, we've written specifically about the vernal pools and the cold water fishery. And early on, we wrote about the aquifer replenishment function of Sawmill Brook, as well as the potential down the road use of Cedar Swamp directly as an aquifer for a water source. So I think we've covered it. We did not do it in light of what we now understand about emerging contaminants, conventional and new ones in the Lincoln Street well. Nor did we have quite well, we don't have the information from the sampling wells, the monitoring wells, temperature and whatnot that MECT has. But I guess what I'm saying is that I think the Concom has spoken to the subjects already, but this group has not.
Well, if the task force feels that a letter is appropriate, I'd be happy to draft something and send it to you, Steve. Send it to, and then you could decide whether it should go to the entire task force.
Well, that would be a great service, but I have to point out that based on my last two interactions with the select board, I think they would want to review anything we sent as advice to another board or commission before we did it, which means it can't happen before the 27th because the select board doesn't meet until the following Monday.
So the answer becomes, as individuals, we could choose to speak up on some of these things.
Yeah.
The possibility of PFAS running off construction materials going into the water, et cetera. That's what it comes down to, I think.
Yes, based on the scale of what they're doing up there. Exactly. And I think it's perfectly fair to say that your comments are informed by the work you've been doing and watching down on the task force. So that you can draw a little bit of extra credibility if you like. That's probably the right way to do it. For the record, which is not to say that anyone who feels comfortable talking to any ZBA members can also express their opinions directly. All right, any other suggestions, Helen? We appreciate having you here. So please come again regularly.
Well, I intend to write a letter personally.
Good, thank you. As I mentioned to you before, as one of the outgrowths of the Hamilton's desire to pave Tobacco Road, the entire length of within their town boundaries. You all probably remember Chuck Dam's quick assertion that Manchester will never pave our stretch of that road from the transfer station to the town line. And we've been doing a little background research with Fred Wales' help on what actually is the status of that road. Is it a town-owned road? Is it a right-of-way on someone else's land? And it's a very murky subject. So as I threatened, I'll be back to you as one of the great historians of Manchester to see if you can help us track that down sufficiently. Good. All right, anything else? If not, we're comfortably within our 90-minute envelope, and I'm grateful for everybody's participation and hard work. See if you can put your thoughts together and put them on a calendar. Just by month is sufficient between now and next, let's say, April or May, and send it to Sue. Thank you. I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And as Chairman Thompson says, without objection from anyone on the task force, meeting is adjourned.
Night, everybody.
Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
Steve. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.